Welcome to the 8th of January 2022 edition of the Super Dangerous Show. No, it is not on the usual Thursday slime slot. It's on a Saturday evening. But once again, I've got my good friend Joe Fisher back with me. Joe! Joe!
Do, 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 do. What's going
doing,
on,
man?
Everybody?
I got to ask you, by the way, one thing, how you post, it was dental. Do you have dental surgery last week?
Yeah. I had a tooth extraction. I'm okay. I'm 9 days out now. It still hurts, still itches, still hurts to talk. And so if I'm saying anything unclearly because I'm not pronunciating very well, just say quit mumbling and I'll try to say it again. But no, I'm on the mend, and just because our listeners are just riveted by our myriad of health stories, I just thought I would tell you for 5 seconds.
Yeah.
I got some X-rays, and apparently my foot is not broken, which
Good.
blows my mind considering how painful it is. I know you thought it might be I know that you thought it might be broken, but it is not.
Good.
I'll send you the X-rays later. It's pretty. X-rays are so cool looking.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm doing pretty good. I had an incredibly low energy, lazy holiday. I spent the entire time completely alone, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but I made the most of it by making pumpkin pie for myself and processing a lot of firewood.
Fair enough. If I was on my own for 9 days, I would go through a lot of pornography.
9 whole days.
I could. I don't know.
You can't make it 9 days.
Depleted and my body shriveled up into like some desiccated nothingness.
Yeah, and then you'd have a difficult time reintegrating with society because you'd expose yourself to so much extreme content. You'd be unable to kind of reintegrate with like a regular, normal, healthy relationship.
I would just look at people, and if you think your mouth is numb and slurry, mine would be like, oh.
So let me guess, you would consume a copious amounts of pornography, crypto charts, crypto Twitter, and probably, I mean, what's some other just, tainted fruit we can toss in there?
Well, let's see. There would be a lot of GTA Online playing. There would inevitably be a bit of booze swilling. I mean, by the way, that friend that I got in touch with who works for that other project, I drunk texted him after downing a decent amount of gin and getting sentimental. So yeah, booze can be helpful for reconnecting.
I love it.
We had like an hour-long sober conversation yesterday, and yeah, he was just sort of, I found out this is after like I haven't really spoken to him in at least 5-6 years, and before that we worked together maybe 10 years ago. As I said, for those who aren't listening to the replay but the recording, I once produced a music video for him. We're good friends, but he works on a major blockchain project. I think that had something to do with me introducing him to Bitcoin in 2012 and then giving him a heads up on Ether in 2016. And the guy has deep dived everything. I mean, he did all the initial day trading, then he's studied all of the different technologies, and now he's actually running a project, which I think is fantastic. And he's got backing from a fairly big project. I think it's called ARweave. And I think, we're going to have some nice discussions tomorrow and hopefully see where they go.
That sounds fantastic. So it sounds like I didn't hear about how your holiday season was, but I know what it did not entail, which was all of the aforementioned degenerate debauchery.
No, because thankfully I have a lovely wife who keeps me on the straight and narrow. And actually, to be fair, we had like the most innocent, actually it was just an awesome holiday. We did nothing except watch movies together. That was great.
Okay, I have to know, what's the best movie you watched? Best meaning very subjective.
Okay. Right, so the 3 big movies I watched, the new Spider-Man movie, which I was surprised about because I thought I'd like it.
Spider-Man fans are like, we're going to murder you.
Well, they can. I was a Spider-Man fan. It was all right. All the Marvel movies, I don't know, maybe I've just outgrown them, or maybe I've hit a plateau of saturation, but it was very much, it was good, but meh.
I think the saturation plateau for the Marvel formula is, to say that it's played out, I think is a gratuitous understatement.
Yeah. I mean, like I tried watching the Hawkeye series, and what happened was I just skipped. You know that thing where you just kind of fast forward, fast forward, fast forward, watch a few seconds. Did that for every episode, and then I just read the spoilers on Wikipedia.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that's it. I'm good. I'm done.
I know this is going to sound really ridiculous, but I'm curious if any of the listeners do this. So if there's a movie I'm kind of I'm not really that interested. I mean, I don't watch many movies, and so I kind of covet that time that I'm willing to devote to 2 hours to try to enter a different world. Mm-hmm. But if something just strikes me as off, or just I don't really know if I want to see this, or Hollywood screwed this up, or whatever, I sometimes just watch, some of the hilarious 15-minute reviews, and then that's me exposing myself to the movie.
Yeah.
And so, for example, Red Letter Media on YouTube, they do sometimes just hilarious movie reviews, and it's just full of spoilers. It's just dorks just dorking out about the content, and I actually find that more enjoyable than the 2-hour time commitment sometimes.
Honesttrailers.com. The Honest Trailers series for me, that has been a whole new world of ripping on things that I love.
Yeah, I love it.
By the way, the movie that I did love, and I find it does polarize people. I love the Matrix Resurrection film. It was really good. I
did not see it.
It was very much a self-deprecating movie that was highly self-aware. It was literally a Matrix that was aware of its own Matrix, looking at the Matrix as a nostalgia trip.
Interesting.
And it was really interesting to me on a lot of different layers. So much so that I watched it again the next day.
Oh wow!
Just because I was like, yeah, I thought it was really good. And then the other one that I watched was Fast and Furious, which I'd never seen the original Fast and Furious. And
okay, so did you watch the original, the very first one?
The very first one.
Wow. Okay. Welcome to Hollywood's highest-grossing franchise.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'd seen the very latest one on the airplane back from a trip abroad, and I was like, there's a big backstory here. I'd only seen Tokyo Drift before that one. I was like, oh, it's not that good. And
so it's so the Fast and the Furious, it's so funny. So that franchise, it's so funny. I've been bewildered for the majority of my adult life about why that franchise is so big, and I think it's actually the highest grossing franchise in Hollywood. I think it is. And I somehow came across someone else trying to grapple online, probably in a YouTube comment or something, trying to grapple with why is this so popular? And it really boiled down to an incredibly simple formula, which I'm going to bastardize here. But the formula was essentially, flawed anti-hero protagonists, strong sense of family and community dynamics, plenty of action, ending on a high point that reinforces community and family dynamic. That's it. That's every movie. Every one of those movies, they hit those 4 points, and then there's crazy action, and it worked so well. Now they're the biggest blockbusters.
Now they are literally launching cars into space.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
After a drag race, the first one is just basically boils down to a simple race between 2 cars on a 2-mile run. And the very latest, the last one I saw, they're literally launching a goddamn car into space to drive through a satellite.
Okay, that's amazing. I have to see this now.
Yeah.
Honestly, with as crazy as the world is these days, I just want my media to just be easy and trashy, and I'm good. And then I can go back to stressing out about the state of the world immediately after the credits run.
So the stressing about the world is literally all I have been doing for the last 2 weeks whenever I've not been, sublimating myself in nostalgia. So I totally get
Sublimating.
it. I totally get it. It's the world is literally burning. I did this episode with Wisdom last week, and we were talking about the Great Resignation, and, brief recap. We basically gave a European/UK perspective on what we thought was going on. And basically it all came down to, hey, you guys do what you want to do. I really do respect individual freedoms. You should kind of try and find your own happiness, because in a world where there is so much misery, you got to take control of what you can. Does that seem fair?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, since I wasn't there for that episode, but I feel like I can summarize an hour long, diatribe of mine into into like one paragraph. And I would, to inject myself into the conversation you have with wisdom, I would simply say that I consider myself a reasonably intelligent person. And I'm in a situation now where I am so starved of so much critical data across so many fronts. And the data that I get, some of it is perfectly logical and sensical. Some of it is so contradictory. I can't make heads or tails of it. And I'm just in this like soup of, I have no idea what's going on or what's pulling the strings. Is it simple economic pressure? Is it just typical geopolitical maneuvering and statecraft? Is it aliens? Like, I have no idea, right, what's happening. And what I know is that the data is so diffuse, scant, but also superfluous at the exact same time, that really good people can be pulled very, very, very strongly in opposing directions and have equally intense, valid, vetted data streams to support very different perspectives. Given that we're in this environment, I feel like I have to just immediately regress all the way back to what I would call just like first principles of humanity. And that is, do the best I can to have an open heart, open mind, give everyone the benefit of a doubt, and at some point look after your own personal needs and quit relying on other people to do it for you. And like, that's it. Like, because I have no idea what's going on. And, you can argue about anything you want. What should we teach kids in schools? And you're not taking this medication, and we've got some people that objectively, will have a higher all-cause mortality due to, bad lifestyle factors, really unhealthy lifestyle, unhealthy diet, that kind of thing, literally, going at the government because they want to rescind government support for other people because other people won't conform to their idea of healthy lifestyle. It just doesn't make any sense. Nothing makes any sense anymore. So open heart, open mind, try to maintain as much curiosity as humanly possible, give everyone the benefit of a doubt of their intentions until proven otherwise, and then assume more personal responsibility to look after yourself, because you can't trust other people to do it for you, because even your neighbor or your parent or your sibling who is a good person, he might be really butting heads about what you should be doing, and what's the right thing to do. But the reality is that I would probably be incapable of making a determination as to who's more valid than the other if I had access to both data streams, because our data is insane anymore. There we go. I'm done.
I agree with you. I think you just need to take it. For me, I think you need to take as many perspectives on board, but ultimately you can only do what's right, what works for you. And that's
exactly, and that might change. Yeah, and that might change. Like I'm going all over the place. And that's fine. Just I feel like we need the freedom to be all over the place. We need the freedom to go down a bunch of weird, crazy conspiracy rabbit holes. We need the freedom to just assume that our corporate overlords really are completely benevolent and are trying to do the best to take care of us, even though it doesn't seem like it. And, we need the freedom to go in all these different directions, while at the same time, all assuming everyone's kind of shared humanity without immediately assuming that anyone that makes a different choice than you or thinks something different is horrible. Because that's really that's really the rub. 2021, 2020, hopefully not 2022. Like, if I've learned anything, it's that, when shocked or when scared, people just flee to the bleachers of whatever their baseline is and don't want to hear anything else. And it's been really bad. I mean, I'm actually almost thinking that the polarization and division is probably one of ultimately the most long lasting harms that's actually transpired. And that's terrifying.
I don't know how this is going to play out. That's it.
No, me neither. Me neither. I mean, and like you said, like, there's so much. The Great Resignation, for example, right? Like, I don't have a bunch of stats right in front of me. I do know that I just bathed for 2 or 3 months in various headlines about X number of people changing professions. So, so many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people decided to focus on family and have left the workforce, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, hell, I even moved, at the end of 2020. And so, like, we don't know how, like I said, how the hell is this going to play out? We have no idea. And not only has there been a great resignation and like a great shifting, a great shuffling, there's also been a tremendous amount of I would say corporate foot stubbing, and I'm not going to argue at all about the morality or the legitimacy of these companies doing it, but here in the United States, we've got some medical and hospital networks that literally let go of upwards of like 9 or 10% of their entire workforce, and then now are in a situation where they're freaking out about being worried there's going to be an end to the amount of people they can provide care to. Like, we're living in a really weird time. And I have no idea how it's going to play out. And I wish I was optimistic.
Speaking of worried about end of care, I had that exact situation a couple of nights ago.
What happened?
Yeah, it was really intense. Actually, I don't know how much. Basically, I had no beds in A&E, period. That was it. You
had no beds, 0 beds.
And then I had a phone call asking, we were holding ambulances. This is routine now. We're holding ambulances outside.
That's so scary to me.
Which is why then, we discussed this earlier, but holding ambulances outside, which is why it's so difficult to get an ambulance.
I hate to interject, but like an ambulance is a critical first response infrastructure. Yeah. It cannot become an allegory for no beds.
No, not anymore in the UK. I had a major trauma. Like, the dude basically came off his motorbike and was told he, at high speed, had an obvious injury and was told he had to wait 8 hours for an ambulance. So his mum I was kind of livid at that situation because to me, that's a never event. But anyway, the very concept of standards is changing. And I feel like, people who have standards are going to go through a very tough time, at least as far as healthcare is concerned. So honestly, going back to what you said, I wouldn't take anything for granted right now. I'd just be careful. But that said,
I agree.
This kind of something you brought up, you moved at the end of 2020. And that was interesting. What triggered the move? I just wanted to know.
I mean, I could talk forever about this, but okay.
Well, I have stuck it in the cliff notes of this episode, which was I wanted to ask you about your move.
Well,
you went to the free state, didn't you?
I moved to the state of New Hampshire, or the locals like to call it the great state of New Hampshire, or the last free state of New Hampshire. There's a million names. It's really dorky. But anyway, so I was living in New York State, and I had lived there for, my gosh, 11 years. I think 11 years. And so first off, there's a lot of details that are not important. So I just want to give little bullet points. So I'd already lived I'd lived in New York for like 10 or 11 years. Actually not full time, because I did spend some time living in a few other places off and on, but for the most part, I was in New York State for 10 or 11 years. That was already kind of exceeding the amount of time I wanted to be in any one place, because I kind of want to experience as much of the world as possible. And so I was completely comfortable with the idea of, every 5, 6, 7 years, unless I really found a place that like really spoke to my heart and my sensibilities, that I was going to be pretty comfortable moving around. And so I'd already been in New York for a long time. 2, when everyone gets shut in, like we did in New York for as long as we did, and I'm someone that really took things seriously. I was one of the first people in my entire social network to basically be like, hey, everybody, I'm not hanging out anymore, and I don't know what's going on, and whatever's happening, I have, just, like, not only for simple self-preservation due to not knowing what's happening, but also because knowing that an illness is incoming, that's one, it's here. Two, it's going to get bad. Three, we don't have any idea how this is going to play out inside of our population. I decided the most responsible thing to do was pretty much like pre-isolate like 2 months early. And my theory was pretty simple. I'm self-sufficient. I'm a single guy. I live alone. I'm self-sufficient. I don't need anything. I grow a lot of my own food. I have solar panels and water. I'm good. Like, I do not need to go and do whatever I'm going to do that could involve getting an injury someplace. It's just, I don't know how to help the system, so I'm not going to tax the system. That's pretty much the choice that I made pretty early. And so, and in some ways my fears were realized. In other ways I was like, okay, wow, we're going to make it, and it was an interesting experience. So with all that shut-in time, I had a lot of time for introspection, and I kind of realized that I'd been here for quite some time, and that I definitely was kind of feeling a bit of a wanderlust. And so not only did I have that realization, I also kind of saw everyone in my community, even people I don't really know, I kind of saw the polarization and the division start growing between everybody. And I saw kind of this hair trigger emotional response to different types of stimuli. And I honestly really didn't like it. And, I was in a weird situation of being kind of chastised by some people that might even listen to this someday. I mean, I was chastised by some people for being, too fearful and too reactive to what was happening in like January and February with like the news in the world. And then those same people flipped. And then 6 months later, when it's the summer of 2020, and I'm like, okay, everybody, like, now's the time to get your stuff done. Cases are down, everything's down. You can be outside now. We have all the information, like sunlight's great, get outside, And so then I was getting chastised for not like living and being like a fear hermit, just 6 months later by the same people. And I just kind of saw this division, this polarization just keep get worse and worse and worse and worse. And it got to the point where, and then when I saw the economic policy of, the US government, but also many other world governments. And once I realized that no one was really in charge trying to figure these things out with like a mastery or like with an efficiency for like public benefit in mind. Once I realized that, I honestly got deeply troubled and I got deeply scared. And what I mean by that is that we should have known everything by July, or let alone August of 2020. By August of 2020, with the trillions and tens of billions of dollars that were being spent and thrown around, we should have had blood samples from every single human that died of this disease. We should have had complete, I'm talking like 600 data point matrices on every individual case and death and person that would volunteer the data that had a really mild run of the case. We should have known everything about everything that was going on. Everything. We should have known exactly how much vitamin D you need. We should have known exactly, what different lifestyles and comorbidities. We should have known that. Like, this is not complicated. This could be.
I feel that the weird thing is, even though you're saying that, like, actually about 6 months in, a lot of the medical community kind of knew, but it's just that they weren't really kind of communicating with each other as a fish. The system wasn't set up.
Okay. Yes. So to buttress your point, I was listening to a lot of people, a lot of different people across all different spectrums, some mainstream, some like really fringe and weird. And I was just inhaling data. And you are correct. There was a lot of people that were doing in vitro, that were doing in vitro studies on just, hundreds of different off the shelf drugs. Some of them were showing efficacious efficacious results in petri dishes. Most were not. There were tons of people on the fringes, no one in the center and no one at the top doing this research, but there were people on the fringes doing these things. And there were people making all kinds of correlations. Like, for example, people that had high vitamin D in their blood were having, much better outcomes and like substantially less likely to be ill. I mean, I was hearing about these things and I was also hearing about possible beneficial early treatments as early as like March of 2020. But that hearing these things, but seeing zero motivation from centralized powers to explore it, and not only zero motivation to explore these things, like a disincentive to explore these things, freaked me out. And I had no idea what was going on, and why. If some crazy doctor with a crazy beard in New York City says, "Hey, I've treated 600 people, I haven't lost one. This is my protocol." Like, why weren't private jets scrambling and like this person's office being like severely investigated for the possible efficacy of what they're doing, right? Like, why didn't that happen, right? Over and over and over and over again. And it honestly, it freaked me out, and I didn't know what was going on. And I saw that society, like, country and civilization, or at least, my civilization, wherever that means, I felt like we were starting to dig a hole, and I had no idea how deep that hole was going to go, where it was going to go, or what we were going to have to fill that hole with. Are we going to have to fill that hole with an incredible increase in inflation, an incredible increase in taxation? I had no idea, right? Like, are we going to have to fill that hole? Are we going to have to fill that hole with a loss of civil liberties? I have no idea, but I felt like a big hole was being dug. And so here I am coming up on the end of 2020, seeing, basically being presented with just nothing but negative or terrifying data points, not really knowing how much of it is just my own observational bias or how much of it is real, having no ability to figure that out. I mean, for lack of a better term, I had about a 1 month period of time to decide what place can I go and where can I go to at least look after myself personally, that I perceive to be the most insulated from my worst fears. And that was literally the judgment call that I made. And New Hampshire came up at the top of the list by a wide margin, with Wyoming, Alaska, and Florida being, distant, in the distant, quite behind New Hampshire. And so I felt like I didn't have any real anxiety about where I should go. I thought that I was going to move to a place that was already incredibly pro decentralization, pro cryptocurrency, that already had a really robust set of laws in place to kind of protect autonomy, individual autonomy, and like just freedom to choose whatever you're doing. And I just felt like if any place was going to ride it out, it was probably going to be here. And so far, I definitely think I made the right call, because all I've seen is the kind of populace, the kind of rugged individualist, citizen of this particular state, for whatever reason, just seems to produce, if you just research how politics at local and state level happen in this state, it's really fascinating. I believe there's one state representative for every 2,000 citizens. So there's a lot of them now. And you only get to serve one term, 2 years. You don't get paid. Right? Yeah. Like, when you really get into it, it gets really weird. And I've fallen increasingly in love with how things operate here.
See, that's the funny thing. MPs can get like 80 grand a year or more, plus they can do second jobs in the UK. So I like the idea that your representatives don't get paid.
I think they do, but it's like $200 or something like that. It's something negligible. It's so negligible. I laughed when I heard it. I was like, what? I'm trying to look this up right now. But I know it's really, really low, really low. And I also believe that you, at least in the past, I'd read that you also get a special license plate that you put on your personal vehicle that signifies that you are a public representative, that you use for the time that for your 2-year term, right? Mm-hmm. So it looks like, your salary is $250 apparently
per month, yeah,
for all houses, For all houses of legislature, the two houses, the salary is $250, and I don't think that's per month. I think that's for the year.
Oh, all right, even better.
See, it's the one thing I don't like about that is that I feel like that produces an environment where people that have the comfort in their lifestyle to get into politics are the ones that are able to do it, when I would love to see hay farmers and auto mechanics get in there.
So,
but at the same time,
what I want to know is there room for part-time politicians in that system, though? You know,
I think that there is. You know, like I said, I'm not personal friends with any of the state representatives, but because there are a lot of them, and because they churn through, you know, often due to term limits. I know there's a lot of them, and that, you know, they're just all over. I think one lives, you know, an ex-representative lives down my road, I think. And I know that they're very busy, and that I know they're very busy when they're in session and they're trying to get through a lot of laws. But one thing that's happening in this particular state is they're removing laws. They like prune deprecated or outdated or no longer viable, legislature, basically. And that's something I feel like no state ever does. And so, yeah, so it's just, I felt like this was the best place to write it out. And in some ways I feel a little selfish for leaving where I was previously. But the reality is that once I realized that so many people were just kind of so polarized on these issues that I didn't have the personal stamina or fortitude to like really try to just go and just waylay in there and try to offer my perspective. And when I got nervous about who's going to pay for all this debt, you know, who's going to pay for all this stuff, what's going to happen. And I just saw what lawmakers were doing at all levels of the federal government. And I just got nervous. And so I went to the Free State, and it looks like a lot of people had the same idea, because if you look at the chart of where net migration has been in the United States in the past 2 years, New Hampshire is definitely one of the higher states of net migration per 100,000 people. However, because it's a relatively low population state with the vast majority of its land locked into forest, either through private holdings or state or national holdings, there's really just not that many places for people to move to. And so we have an absolute housing crisis here. I mean a housing crisis, you know, and so the value of real estate is so high now because people have tried to move here that, you know, what might be a $75,000 starter home in other states, you know, in other states that border New Hampshire, is a $300,000 home in New Hampshire.
Wow.
And I understand the market forces, and I understand even a tiny amount of people wanting to move here for the same reasons I did would cause a tremendous, you know, housing bubble or ascension in house value. But I'm aware of multiple people, some families living in temporary housing or even hotels in the state of New Hampshire right now, as they try to find some kind of permanent housing, because they want to be here, and they want to be here bad enough they're willing to pay the exorbitant prices to live in a hotel while they try to find an apartment. It's crazy to me. But that's how desperate people are to kind of find, quote, I guess, safe harbor or safer harbor.
It sounds to me like there's a void of safe harbor.
Correct.
This is a really interesting point that you brought up, because at the end of last year, you know, December time, I was thinking, where am I going to move to? I was like, I really, really want to get out of the UK for a lot of different reasons. I've been going through my head. And then I was like looking at the world map. There was like a very brief pause. On one shift, I had like 10 minutes. I was like, I can just stop for a moment. And I literally, on a computer, I brought up the map of the world. And I just started just glancing and going, oh, right, this place is fucked. This place is fucked. This place is politically fucked.
Yep.
Not touching Australia. New Zealand's okay, bit far, bit cold. And like on the entire map, I could only identify it. So I was aware of New Hampshire, but I was like, all right, so Panama, certain parts of Central America, certain parts of the Caribbean, maybe a couple of offshore islands, some tax havens. But really, there aren't actually that many places in the world where freedom seems like a given, or
Yep.
autonomy seems like a given, or privacy seems like a given.
Yep.
That sweet combination of things that you and me have kind of grown up and been sort of fed the diet of, this is the thing we should strive for. If you actually look at the world as a whole, there aren't actually that many places that are truly free, truly democratic, truly, give you a sense of personal security and privacy, have this sweet combination of civil liberties and good infrastructure. There are very
Yep.
few. Actually, perhaps to me that says to me that perhaps the leaders of various societies need to look and go, well, if so many people are willing to pay these huge premiums in New Hampshire, perhaps we may need to make our states a bit more like New Hampshire. We should change our framework a bit. Go, hey, and what is stopping other states from doing this?
You see, I mean, I don't know. I don't like the way this is going to sound, but
it's fine.
Going back a few years ago, when New Hampshire was kind of entering my radar, it was mostly doing it under the guise of being one of the most kind of pro crypto friendly U.S. states very early on, and I think the legislature passed quite a few super pro crypto laws, kind of protecting individual rights to have it and to use it all the way far back as like 2015. And so it was always on my radar because of that. And so I was always kind of curious what was happening. But what I think really, for lack of a better term, red pilled me on just how different you can live, I guess, for lack of a better term. So, for example, New Hampshire kind of blows so many stereotypes and blows so many of the. So, okay. So if you look at
when you say stereotypes, I was just going to say, the first thought was libertarian stereotypes, because I met a couple of other people, I've spoken to Joel and a few other people, and it's like, actually what strikes me is how genuinely they follow libertarianism in the most genuine, like, I will hear your view.
Yeah, no, of course. Well, yeah, exactly. I don't know that much about it, honestly. And, but those people like Joel, they're very, very principled. And even if I don't agree with you, I'm attracted to people that have a high degree of integrity and principle, even if I don't agree with it, because I sense a safety in knowing where people are and what they're about, and being very clear.
Just not being a hypocrite makes such a huge difference, or at least
it makes a huge
difference. If you're at least being aware of when you're being a hypocrite, just a bit of self-awareness.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. So the point that I was trying to make is, for example, New Hampshire is it's not a very big state. I think it's around 1.7 million people now. And the vast majority of that number live in a relatively tight area around Nashua, Manchester, Concord, the state capital, and a couple other, in the seacoast where, New Hampshire does not have that much coast, but it has, some pretty idyllic, old world New England vibes with lighthouses and crab shacks, that kind of thing. Well, anyway, New Hampshire actually does have some areas that contain a relatively high population density. And so the point that I'm trying to make here is, for example, New Hampshire also has really low crime. Now, I'm not saying it has no crime and it doesn't have any murders, but the amount of violent crime is very low. And it's a place where many of the laws you see being enacted in other areas to combat crime that seem to be not helping, like looking at, like, say, Chicago, for example, with how many homicides it has every week and things like that, and how they try to crack down on it, and they damn near eliminated personal firearm ownership, and they've really cracked down with lots of laws and lots of bureaucracy. It's done literally nothing to solve the problem. In fact, it might have actually made it worse. And then you can look at a place like New Hampshire that has a really robust amount of civil liberties, rights to personal protection, et cetera, et cetera. And then also it has some pretty high population centers that are not free of crime and free of violent crime, but have a lot less of it than other places. And if you just think about that one example, and then you look at it, and then you look at, like, say, taxation, for example. There's no state income tax. and there's no state sales tax. Okay. And so that's a big deal. Like in New York, that was like 13% of my gross, of my like, net of gross income was just the state sales and the state income
You
tax.
still have federal income tax.
Yes,
Okay.
but no state income tax. There's very few taxes in New Hampshire. To my understanding, there's a couple small types of corporate taxes, and there is property taxes. And property taxes are high, but they're not as high as they are in high parts of other states, like New York, for example. And so immediately upon moving here, so just God, it's so hard to peel this onion. So you would expect a place where the local government was collecting so much less income from the people to be rife with all kinds of problems. You would expect other state governments to spend the money, to spend all those collected taxes to solve. Well, that's not the case here. New Hampshire has some of the lowest and has always had some of the lowest levels of unemployment. It has some of the highest amounts of fiscal and financial mobility. It has excellent schools. It has incredibly low crime. And I think the roads are better. Just like just for some reason, for collecting so much less from the people, it seems to me. I mean, the state parks are beautiful, and just infrastructure is good. So I'm living. I mean, I just want to put this into perspective for people because I'm getting worked up now. I live on a dirt road. It's 2.5 miles of unpaved road to get to my house. Okay, the house I used to live at was on a paved road, only 7 miles as the crow flies from a top 10 Ivy League school in the United States. Okay. Like 7 miles away from a top 10 Ivy League school and one of the most affluent and educated towns in the United States. I was only 7 miles from that. I was inside that bubble. Now I live 30 miles from an interstate highway. I live 2.5 miles, maybe 3 miles down a dirt road. Okay. My mailbox is at the bottom of the dirt road because the post people can't drive up it. I have gigabit high-speed internet at my house on a dirt road. Okay. And like I had to use a WiMAX radio connection to get 11 megabits of Wi-Fi from a mountaintop 11 miles away because it was the only viable broadband, if you could even call it that I could get when I was only 7 miles away from one of the richest towns and like in the country, let alone the state of New York. And now I'm in the middle of nowhere and I've got gigabit at the road. Right. Okay. Like that, this is friggin' crazy. Okay. And so in almost every, and here's another thing too. I'm really getting worked up. So I go to the grocery store here. There's a bunch of local grocery store chains. They look like regular grocery stores. Okay. There's nothing fancy. They're not kind of crunchy granola hippie. They're just generic grocery stores. You go in there and there's one grocery store chain in particular, and I feel like I'm entering into like a time warp. I feel like I'm in an adult body, but I'm going into a grocery store that my parents used to drag me to when I was like 9 years old. The prices are so low that I don't understand how they do it. I can actually take and fill a shopping cart with fresh veg, fresh fruit, even some convenience items. Okay. I can fill a full-size shopping cart level to the top and not even spend $100. Not even spend $100. Okay. And then there's no sales taxes on it. So it's already 7% cheaper than what I was paying in New York. And then I get to drive, down my very well maintained and very well plowed of snow dirt road with gigabit at the telephone pole outside my house and eat my groceries that were priced from 1989. Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going on, but something is happening in New Hampshire that is very unique. I don't know what it is exactly, and it's working. And I'm very excited to see where this goes because so many other places in the world or in the United States are moving in very different directions. They're adding laws, they're adding fiscal liabilities to continue living there. They're increasing taxes, et cetera, right? So this is really going to be a tale of like economic and like political and like social independence models. And I'm very excited to see where things go. But so far, I love what's happening. And I'm just thankful that I feel like I made it in, because if I was trying to move here now, I simply couldn't have afforded to. And so, the big issue now is going to be to figure out how to increase housing and allow people that want to move here, that want that lifestyle, that want these freedoms, for whatever drawbacks they may entail, say, not having access to like a giant multi-million, population city or something, because we got to get that figured out, because we don't want these people to bleed out and not wind up making it here, because they will make what's happening here stronger, not weaker.
I mean, I almost feel like other states that may not be as wealthy as New York, or basically states that have been struggling, maybe they need to look at the legislative framework in New Hampshire. Maybe they need to look at the levels of grassroots political engagement occurring within New Hampshire. Maybe they need to look at the philosophy, the ethos, and maybe adapt and mimic that sort of model, so they too can attract people of that mindset and then reap the benefits of attracting people of that sort of mindset. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. And so, like I said, I'm by no means an expert on this, but I'm aware of these little enclaves kind of popping up all over the country. I know that a lot of people have moved to Idaho. I know that a lot of people have moved to Florida, and there's been talk of these kind of liberty-centric enclaves. Now, honestly, I probably wouldn't even get along with a lot of these people. I consider myself to be, pretty, I don't know, I guess pretty easygoing and very much pro, personal freedoms and personal liberties in ways that some people perhaps, kind of more staunch religious people would not approve of. So I don't even know if I would get along with these people, but these are people that are kind of forming their own little enclaves and their own little groups. And it seems like it's kind of happening all over the country, but by far times 100, it's not happening on a state level or as broadly as it's happening in New Hampshire. And
so that's interesting, because to me, it almost sounds like the period of enforced self-isolation has precipitated a reorganization of communities within the United States.
That is exactly what's happened. I mean, some of the more populous states like California, I'm pretty sure California lost a congressional seat in the federal government due to people leaving. I'm not sure that that's happened, but I've heard it several times.
I have to wonder if it's that introspection and actually finding out what you want and who you are and actually what you feel you need that's triggering this. I mean, this is happening in London, by the way. There's an exodus of people out of London. It's a multifactorial thing, and they're moving into the Midlands, and they're moving into other parts of the UK where houses are just much bigger, where there's more space, correct, where there's better access to various services, because we're now all allowed to work. Many more of us are now allowed to work from home. And the thing is, when you're allowed to work from home, you don't need to work in an office. And if a lot of the big offices were traditionally, all the big fancy shiny offices and located in London, but now all of these people are working in tiny homes in London thinking, well, my house in London's worth $500,000, but it's like a 2-bed. Why don't I sell this and then move to a 5-bed somewhere on the outskirts or somewhere a bit further away? And that just and something that gives me access to a better quality of life, more reflective of what I need, rather than perhaps what's more reflective of what I thought I needed, which was maybe to work for some big ass company that's now giving the option to not now that the corporate ladders are effectively allowing you to be a bit more decentralized, I think people are taking advantage of that opportunity. And I mean, it was interesting. I've been house hunting recently. I don't live in London. I used to for 8 years. I grew tired of it. I hated it in the end. And I would never move back there for various reasons, some of which are covered. I'd visit it though, fun place to visit, but there are much better places in the UK to visit once you've traveled around as well, because I think that's another syndrome, is actually people who get stuck in a big city or in a big bright lights area where all of the hopes and dreams and activity are. I think they forget to kind of like look around, play the field, see what everything's like on the other side of those fences, because once you do, you realize there's lots of opportunity everywhere. But yeah, as I said, it's interesting, like the period of isolation enabling working from home. It's giving people the opportunity and the reason to move out of bigger cities where living conditions and standards may not be quite up to par with what they expect or want.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, one of my friends I was speaking to, they'd moved to an area which actually, ironically enough, I'd considered about moving to, and it sounds almost sort of New Hampshire-ish, but legislation in the UK, it's a bit more homogenous. Sort of, the Lincolnshire area is like, oh yeah, good schools, land and housing is really cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Basic infrastructure's there. And I get it. And I think, if you're able to do your jobs and if you're able to be a productive member of society, irrespective of where you physically are, it really re-raises the question of where should you physically be. Perhaps it's more in keeping with your own sense of identity.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this, by the way, leads me on to the second half of this topic, which is my quest for privacy, which I wanted to outline with you. I wanted to ask you something. Do you use a VPN?
I do sometimes, not all the time.
What's your take on privacy?
Oh gosh, privacy is a human right, and I'm a big fan of the old crypto adage: trust but verify. And I'm finding myself becoming more of a privacy absolutist as time goes on, because I just simply don't trust anyone else but the individual to be responsible with everyone's data. And so, I mean, not only that, but I've been personally the subject of innumerable hacks and data breaches and identity theft. It's happened to me dozens of times now. And so, if for no other reason alone do I just want to not have to call my bank, figure out how to reverse all these transactions, have to get new credit and debit cards issued because somebody got my card number from some website. Like, if it wasn't, just for simple ease of lifestyle and having less anxiety over, getting your information spoofed, I think that everyone should exercise a lot more privacy. But at the end of the day, I just feel that without the individuals having access to an incredibly high amount of robust privacy, whether they choose to take advantage of it or not, I feel that it allows people to be, I guess, for lack of a better term, somewhat manipulated. For example, I mean, how much of what's going on in the world right now is a result of click-seeking algorithms feeding specific types of information to specific people that we know, right? I mean, at some point, you leaking all of your interests and everything that you're into and things you love, things you hate online, at some point, that's going to be turned into a commodity, and that commodity is going to be monetized, and therefore you become the product somehow. And so, if something is free, you are the product. And so I'm very much a privacy absolutist. And you know what? I don't even mind that it might make some things that we all think need to happen harder to do, because I think the juice is worth the squeeze, basically.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, but I'm going to tell you one thing. It's hard when you've been a public, when you've not paid attention to your privacy for a number of years, and when you finally start doing it, the transition has been hard. I know my personal struggle, and this is why I called today's episode The Quest for Privacy, because literally for the last 3 or 4 months, one, I've been trying to de-Google, and two, I've been trying to improve, I've been trying to reduce the number of people who hold my personal information actively. And it's interesting what you said about that need for privacy, how it kind of almost relates to, that sense of self-responsibility, self-determination. A lot of the stuff you discussed, why the synopsis of this show was like, why am I asking you about New Hampshire? In the back of my mind, a part of me was wondering, have you moved there for a greater sense of privacy?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I can't cite specific examples of why this particular state is better from a regulatory framework than other places. But what I can say is that the kind of live and let live mentality of everyone here, including all of the extreme libertarians that moved to the state, including all the, political moderates that also just believe in, personal freedom and personal responsibility. For all these reasons alone, I feel that it's one of the better places to be, and anything else is just icing on the cake.
Yeah, I mean, I was like thinking back to one of the first things you said, which was, when you're in New York, you had all of these different people, many of whom were your friends, kind of getting up in your business and maybe, criticizing you for your own decisions when, firstly, they didn't have to. Them criticizing your decisions wasn't really going to impact their lives in, you could argue it wouldn't impact their lives in any meaningful or useful way. And the other thing is it's kind of intrusive. Okay, yeah, fine, they know what you're doing, but in almost a weird kind of way, I feel it's almost intrusive on your privacy for them to be kind of getting up in your business with how they feel you should be
yes
living.
and no. I mean, it's a really funny thing because I was being accused of sowing paranoia and fear in January and February of 2020. And then in June, July, I was realizing the harm of everyone being shut in and no one being outside. I mean, it's the beginning of summer. It's the best part of living in a temperate climate. And everyone's afraid to go outside. They're all shut in. And we had really hard data already at that point to suggest that being in tight enclosed areas is where the danger is. And so, the whole, lockdown, shut in, stay in your home, I actually believe those policies actually contributed to making things a lot worse than better. And so here I am, being like, hey, if anyone wants to meet up at the park or go on a hike, like, I'm totally game. And everyone's like, I can't believe you're going to go out. And I'm like, what? Like, I'm leaving my home where I live by myself. I'm going to drive in my car by myself. I'm going to go to an outdoor, open, sunny place at the lake or something like that. Yeah. And like hang out with a bunch of people, probably 7 feet apart, and bullshit. And like, this isn't the problem. We have the data, this is not the problem. And I'm not gonna go to the bar, like, I don't do that, and yet again, like, I was catching flack. And that's when I realized that people become so invested in their own safety net narratives that they've kind of constructed. And once I realized people were constructing these personal safety nets and these personal narratives based upon what I considered to be either at best heavily distorted, at worst intentionally incorrect data, it like just kind of freaked me out. And I honestly, I hate this analogy because I don't think it's a great movie, but if you've ever seen They Live, where Hot Rod Roddy Piper finds the glasses that will show that half the people around are aliens that are subjugating humanity. And he's like, puts these glasses on, he looks around, he's like, oh my God, like, what's happening?
Yeah, I've watched They Live 3 times. So.
Yeah. So I don't actually think it's a great movie, but like,
it's a great movie. I'm just going to say it there in a really kind of shitty way. It's a great movie.
Like, that's the experience I had. And honestly, like, I think a lot of people had that experience. And like, it's not like I've never felt like I've been armed with the truth, whatever the hell that means. I don't even know what the hell that means anymore. But I felt like I was armed with reasonable estimations of personal risk and risk to others based upon good data that suggested that we all could have been living a much healthier lifestyle starting by early summer of 2020 than we had been. And I got a lot of flack for that. And most of my closer friends are fine, but it's the people that were just mostly acquaintances, that kind of thing. People went at me pretty hard on Facebook or, and just private chats and things like that. And I'm just like, man, you guys, like I feel really bad. Like, I'm not promoting anything ridiculous here. I'm saying we should go for a fucking bike ride. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous, and you just want to shut in. And I mean, I know, like, this is going to freak some people out. I don't know. I only know a few people like this, but I know people that refuse to leave their house or their apartment right now. They just refuse.
That's
like,
really sad.
I mean, like they may walk like their animal, if they have one, on like a very tight loop, but they literally refuse to leave their house or their apartment. And we're talking like some of these people are approaching like 18 months now living like this, 19 months living like this. And they're on medication. They're too scared, too anxious to leave. They're a literal like wreck of a human, and I think that it's really tragic and completely unnecessary. And my heart goes out to them, and I hope they want to hang out sometime. But it's terrifying. It's terrifying.
So, I mean, this is really interesting. There are so many things I want to touch on, as you've said. I mean, that whole idea that people are being locked up, isolated, and they're linked to the world is like media and social media, and it's algorithmically feeding them things based on all of the information they're voluntarily giving up to private corporations. That's effectively reinforcing their worldviews. I mean, it's funny how capitalism, when you strip it from privacy, can very quickly turn into something polarizing and ugly and destabilizing to society. That is the most, never mind like all the other ways in which abuses of privacy, intentional or otherwise, can lead to abuses of human rights, individuals, groups. I mean, we could do this subject for ages, like the reasons why the quest for privacy should undertake. And, all you have to do is, look at the proposed treatment of, is it Uyghurs in China? Look at laws surrounding data privacy in Australia. Look at just look at legislation all over the world. Look at the ways in which governments, have repeatedly abused their powers to repress people and used their access to publicly available data and sometimes collected private data on individuals that these individuals may not even be aware, basically being spied on, to effectively victimize people who may have the best of intentions.
Yep.
So, to me, the quest for privacy is really simple. My financial situation changed for the better, although based on the last 48 hours of crypto activity, it may be rapidly changing for the worse.
Doom.
Exactly. I literally watched that correction and thought, are we at the start of a bear market? Anyway, moving on from that. I mean, I look and think, okay, how much of my presence is online? How many people have access to my personal information? And how do I just go about scrubbing it? And actually, the need for privacy is almost secondary to the quest for privacy, because actually undertaking this quest has been a pain in my ass.
Yep.
I have literally had to go through my Google junk mail, go through my Google, the thing. So I'm using Gmail, trying to de-Google. The very act of de-Gmailing is the single thing that's going to keep me locked into Gmail for at least a year, because I don't know.
Almost impossible.
How many services have I signed up to, that actually are linked to my Gmail account, that are essential services? I'll only know over the course of maybe a 1 or 2 year period, because in some cases, I only get the relevant emails like once a year. I'm trying to think who emailed me recently. HMRC, they're linked through my Gmail account. Yep. One thing that really bugged me in my quest for privacy is the other day I got an email from Coinbase saying they have to disclose to, HMRC, which is the UK government's taxation authority, that I have a Coinbase account because I've transacted more than $3,000. I was like, I was pretty annoyed. I was pretty annoyed. I'm doing my self-assessment return. I'm disclosing all of my transactions, but it's not easy having to retrospectively, I've not done that many, but it's not easy having to retrospectively construct these. And, there's a weird kind of pain in knowing, how am I going to put this? I'm going to be completely honest and transparent about my transactions with the government anyway. Of course, that's not a problem here. But almost by giving them that information, now they've made my job harder, in that if they really want to, now they've made my job harder in the sense that some of these things I could have truncated effectively. I could have given them honest data, but necessary data. Now I feel I'm in a position where I'm going to have to give them lots of unnecessary data, which is going to lead to the exact same calculations and the exact same amount that I owe them if I present it in this way, but at least it's not going to create a situation where if they choose to then access those exact logs where I'm going to get questions like, what was this transaction for? Yada, yada. What was this for? La, 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 la. As opposed to me saying, I did this on this date, then this sequence happened, and here's what I owe you. Does that make sense?
It does.
I mean, I'm now basically, they've effectively tripled my administrative workload to achieve the exact same result. And I kind of appreciate where they're coming from, but at the same time, I don't.
You're like, I don't.
I don't, because they're just giving me a headache. But I mean, it is little things like that where, okay, fine. I would rather have my financial affairs as autonomous from the state as possible. And because of the way the state is organized, I don't get the opportunity to enjoy that privilege. And that's fine. I accept the laws of the state and I play by the rules. I'm not going to be hypocritical in that way. That's not my intention.
We all, even if we don't like it, we all do.
Yeah. But I mean, it's just the very act that someone can effectively access that kind of private data without my direct permission or without even asking me. Just a random email, couple of weeks to go, whilst I'm in the middle of just figuring out how to do these and present these calculations. Panicked call to my accountant, as in not panicked in the sense of, oh, how are we going to present? Anyway, point being, quest for privacy. I have been emailing individual services with GDPR. This is the European Data Protection request to remove my personal details. And every single request, it's, more than half the time, it'll bounce back as saying, could you just say what it is you want removed? I'm like, I've made it clear in the initial email. And there's a process. And I'm realizing that actually I'm going to have to do this several hundred or even maybe 1,000 times.
Oh my
I've done it a
gosh.
whole bunch of times already. So I'm kind of getting there. But, when it comes down to the essential services and de-Googling is part of my quest for privacy, as I have de-Googled my phone. I've switched to a non-Google Android operating system, which happens to be Lineage OS at the moment, if anyone wants to know.
I want to talk to you about this, offline later. I want to hear exactly what you did because I'm probably going to copy you.
Yeah. I won't lie. It's a bit of a headache, but, de-Googling. So yeah, moved on to Lineage OS. As soon as you move yourself from a Google phone to a non-Google phone, it's just amazing how aware, even though they're both Android operating systems, you become aware of just how seeded that Google as an entity is into the Android ecosystem and how monopolistic it's become. Google is the world's Google and Facebook combined, they are the world's largest data collection agency.
Yes.
And you can say the same for Apple, but certainly within Android, Google is the largest data collection agency in the world within the Android ecosystem.
Probably by far.
Embedded in every single app and aspect of it.
Correct.
You lose access to your Google Play services. You lose access to Google Calendar. You lose access to Google Drive, Google Docs. You lose access to Google Authenticate. You lose access to Google Maps, and actually it's not just the apps themselves, it's even things like the geolocation services.
Yep.
When you switch to a non-Google Android OS, you don't get geolocation anymore. Not that you don't get a working Maps app anymore, unless you preload something like micro G apps, which is kind of like code that redirects to some other location service, and then suddenly you're dealing with providers that you don't know anything about and potentially trusting them. So I've had to basically forego any map services on my phone. At the moment, I used to have a calendar that would sync, but it would use Google services to sync across all sorts of devices. Now it's just a calendar that's on my phone that can, and I'm going to have to persuade my wife to switch to a slightly different privacy end-to-end encrypted calendar service in order for us to be able to sync our stuff again. So, it's these little things when you want to use cloud-based, if you want to use the equivalent of Google Drive, I'm going to just talk about Nextcloud. That's a service I've discovered. I spoke to CryptoGuard, the particle project guys. They're using Skiff as their SKIFF. They're using that as their equivalent of Google Docs because, again, that's end-to-end encrypted, truly private communications that effectively protect you from snooping from your corporate overlords. I'm saying in case Google and its associate advertisers who will actively scan the contents of your messages and documents to determine where the advertising opportunities are, which in turn creates a data security risk, which creates an IP risk to anything that you're working on. Effectively, Google has this opportunity, if it chooses to abuse its power, to do so in the most corrupt way possible, which is, stealing all your stuff without you even knowing about it. They have that level of power when you use their services, and you trust that they won't abuse that power, but you are relying on them. And at the end of the day, they are humans, and humans can betray that trust.
Yes, I think humans will betray that trust. Is the lesson I've learned from the past couple of years.
Exactly. So now, as I go through this process of de-Googling and pursuing personal privacy in my life and in my data, and I have to admit, I'm sharing a lot of personal information with you guys in a public sphere by recording this.
Yeah,
but I'm comfortable with that. What I really am more comfortable though with is the idea that all of my truly private communications are exactly that, truly private. So I've got a Proton Mail account because that's end-to-end encrypted, and the servers are based in Switzerland and subject to Swiss privacy laws, which are very strong.
Which are strong. However, just recently we learned that they've complied with multiple requests for access to user accounts.
Yeah. And they will do it if there is a statutory legal request that comes from the Swiss government. They will comply. So, we don't have a truly decentralized email service yet. But the day we do, Proton Mail will become redundant. But until we do, Proton Mail is probably the best service that we've got, at least the one that I'm aware of. If anyone knows any others they want to throw my way, please tell me.
I think that there's lots of self-hosted options, but that's a different thing because it turns into you've got to have some technical acumen to use it then.
Exactly. I don't have that technical acumen. I feel like if I really sat down and worked it out, I could probably do so, because the internet, as it was originally designed as a decentralized entity. But over time, all of the services that form the backbone of the internet have largely centralized to several companies. So Amazon for their AWS servers, Cloudflare, again, Google for their sort of data services and drives, Facebook and Apple to a lesser extent. But there is essentially an oligarchy of companies that effectively run the internet as it is. And that's just
and they also collude and use their power to squash any competitors.
Exactly. And I feel that's just the result of a capitalist model that doesn't respect privacy, is that you just end up kind of inching towards oligarchies over time. It's sort of inevitable. Where you have privacy, you can retain competitive edges, you can protect your intellectual property. It gives a bit of space for the startup to kind of get ahead, or at least get a bit further. But when you don't have that, then ultimately you kind of have to work with these people to get anywhere. It becomes difficult.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, what are you thinking, man?
It feels like it's impossible to de-Google, and it feels like I know this is such, I don't even like this phrase, but this is just such, first world problems in a way. It's like, I'm listening to your plight as you go through this process. I'm imagining I'm going to have equal difficulty doing it, equal difficulty as you doing it, and thinking to myself, do I have the capacity? Like, do I actually have the capacity to to really make this switch. I tried switching to Linux like a decade ago. I've done it like 3 or 4 times actually, and I do okay. I switch over, I use it, and I'll refresh a laptop, I'll put Ubuntu on it or something, and like I'm okay. But I just hit so many hard stops that I didn't know existed until I needed to do that software. I needed to edit this. I needed to do that. And then eventually I start turning on a Windows PC more and more and more. And the next thing I know, I'm not using the Linux machine anymore. And I'm afraid the same thing's going to happen. But the thing is that my life actually depends on it.
Yeah.
And our lives actually depend on it. Like we need to quit feeding the beast. And it doesn't even matter if the beast is benevolent and the beast is innocuous. We need to quit feeding the beast, because giving any one source so much power and so much authority is just not good. I don't care what it is. It's just not good. We need alternatives. We need other ecosystems. We need other, if you want to take an exercise to see just how crazy of a world we live in, pull up 2 or 3 search engines, including Google, and type in the exact same search term and see what results you get. And that will show you just how different, like we don't even know how curated our technological experience is, because we don't know what the alternatives are. Like we literally don't even know. Like we feel like we're on the ball and we get it, but we still don't get it. We really have no idea just how far this goes.
I mean, it's funny you say that. It's like, yes, we need diversity of ecosystems in every type of ecosystem, because, think about it, like Facebook went down and then everyone lost their WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook. And I was like, I don't care.
Yep.
I actually, this is again, I don't have a Facebook account. I don't have an Instagram account. I feel so mentally liberated not having apps on my phone that suck up so much of my personal time. I desperately would, every time I've ever logged into Reddit, you're just getting dragged into someone's flame war. Every time I look at Twitter, there's always the temptation to get dragged into someone's, flame war, as it were. And what good does that do? How does that actually meaningfully change my life? What have I productively done? What have I learned that's actually going to empower me in any way? I feel like a lot of these platforms you don't really need, but you also at the same time need a great diversity of ecosystems, because if one of them does go down, I mean, when Australia tried to ban Facebook or did some law, basically.
They did?
Yeah, so Australia, well, they pretty much banned, I think it was private group. There was something, I'll have to go look this up, but basically when they put this ban, Facebook literally took down the Facebook pages for various Australian government-related services that were essential in response, which created so much infrastructure disruption that Australia effectively U-turned within less than a week. They basically backed down.
Wow.
You can go look this up. This is a thing that has happened. I'm paraphrasing, and it's not exactly accurate. Like the fine detail I'm not going to go into, but that's roughly what happened. Australia instituted a law which banned Facebook from functioning in a significant way. In response, Facebook complied with that law in a very blanket manner, to the point that it disrupted Australian infrastructure, which then had to U-turn, and the government had to U-turn. Gosh. That's how powerful Facebook is, that it can actually, that's how embedded so many of our critical infrastructure has now become within the apparatus of privately owned social networks and companies. That's where we're at. And that's why we need diversification of ecosystems, because they provide us with resiliency and security. Should there be an exploit in one of them.
And it's not even a matter of simple distrust of the motives of these huge centralized companies. It's decentralization would breed a more anti-fragile ecosystem for all of us. So yes, I know Facebook goes down and WhatsApp and all this, Instagram, all this stuff goes down. I get it. But what if in 10 years time or 20 years time, is it unrealistic to think that some platforms, I'm not saying these platforms, but some platforms are transmitting a gratuitous amount of medical data or financial data? And just imagine what can happen when I mean, I actually kind of foresee that happening. I mean, effectively, that's what Facebook was trying to do when they launched their own
Google was
crypto.
transmitting was absorbing a gratuitous amount of medical data without
Yeah.
the knowledge of the relevant patients. So this affected the Royal Free Hospital. They were doing a program with Google DeepMind a few years ago, and Google DeepMind was just harvesting patient data without the consent of those patients. They had actually,
Correct.
I believe, looking at the way they did it, that they broke data protection laws in the UK doing it the way they have, and I believe they're currently facing a lawsuit for it as well. But I mean, this is where we're at. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Google has vehicles with 13 cameras and sensors on them driving around our cities right now, just hoovering up all this data, supposedly scrubbing, personal identifiers, house numbers, and license plate numbers. But that's a software thing, and they're taking in the input. And it's one of those things where they're like the sea of obfuscation, or like the sea of anonymous independence of humanity is kind of broken now. That veil is kind of pierced with the ability for one company to have the budget to literally have I don't know, 5, 20, 100, I have no idea, cars running around, vehicles running around, just hoovering up all the data that it can record with its so many megapixel cameras, and it's putting all the information inside one database. I mean, this is a tool that I think would be incomprehensible until it happened, to even state level actors. You mean to tell me that every 90 days I can get a map of what license plate and what vehicle is parked at what residence for the entire country?
The hilarity to me is, imagine if the government, before Google existed, imagine if a government in the world proposed doing that. Imagine what the response would be.
Oh my gosh, people would be rioting in the streets, protesting.
Yeah, and that's the irony, because people don't seem to realize, okay, yeah, we have a long history, a long cultural history, and a long documented history of governments abusing their power. So yeah, societies are naturally, there's a large segment within society that's naturally conscious of the fact that governments can and sometimes will abuse their power. Whereas when it comes to private corporations, the history of private corporations is a lot shorter than the history of governments. So actually, and the knowledge about ways in which corporations abuse their power is less well known than the ways in which governments do so, in part because, that's a different topic, why, but it's true that just feels like the case. And so, I feel like people maybe are much more trusting of private corporations, or maybe they're more inclined to confer trust when they shouldn't.
I just think that most people are not aware of what's actually happening or what is being lost. I think if you went up to almost any person on the street and just gave them hypothetical negative outcomes to them having so much transparency of their personal information, they would go, "Oh, that sucks. I don't want to do that." But because, most people I know are deeply disturbed with things that they have thought about or wanted to buy or were interested in at some point organically, or was mentioned in passing, perhaps without even having cell phones around, to someone else, that then shows up as like the top ad on their social media. Like, that's kind of freaky. And these companies know when people are pregnant before they're pregnant, before they know it. These companies know when some people may be ill before they know it. Like, they know when people are just, they know, they can tell everything. Like, I mean, they have the ability, if only these powers could be used for healthcare, for example, it's just fascinating. I think most regular people, when being faced with the potential realities of what some of these downsides can be, most people will be like, I don't like it. But at the same time, even people like us who are aware of these things and even aware of like hypothetical risks that may or may not transpire into reality, even we are like, man, this is really hard to do. This is really hard.
Yeah, it really is. And what I will say is this: you can't do it all at once. I mean, if you're going to
No.
try and de-Google and reintroduce privacy into your life, I think you need to take a graduated process. You can't be like all at once. You just got to be like, oh, I'm going to do this over the course of a year, 2 years, maybe even 3 years. Just take your time. I mean, I started the process. I went through a phase, a few months of just contacting companies nonstop, went dormant for a year. Then I started de-Googling my phone. And now I've hit that point where, look, I'll be upfront with you because of the data that's already on there and the stuff that I need to migrate. I'm still using Google Drive. I'm still using Google
Yeah.
Mail. I will, once I've done certain things in my personal and professional life, I'll be able to migrate away from those systems. I'll be able to clear the data from those systems. But that process of migration and clearing, that's not something that happens overnight. And I realize and recognize that by not using certain services or removing my access to or cutting myself away from certain services, that I will not get access to certain benefits. Something that's probably going to have to remain on my phone for a very long time is WhatsApp. And I treat it as an acceptable compromise because they have end-to-end encryption by default. So your data is fairly secure, even though Facebook owns WhatsApp, and ideologically I hate Facebook so much. But the reality is, the pragmatic reality is, so many of my friends, colleagues, and family use this service that for me to just uninstall it, that the trade-off, it's just not worth it. And I simply do not have the social clout to move everyone over at this stage. Eventually, maybe, but not at this point in my life. And unfortunately, it goes back to what you said, privacy, getting privacy, pursuing it, it's not convenient. And people like convenience. I genuinely, one of my favorite things to do is to apathetically hang out and do nothing, just to nap, just to hang out with the missus and do nothing.
Yeah.
And I think that as a baseline, that, all right, yeah, it's doing something, but it's not doing anything, productive or whatever. And as a baseline, people don't, most people want to be in that state. It's a pleasant state to be in because it's kind of like a neutrality. So I get it. And then when you do introduce services or you do, force people or engage them with the need to do something, they want it to be as convenient as possible. And unfortunately, the sphere of services that give you stuff for free and make it convenient and easy to use in exchange for your data collection, that is far more prevalent than the sphere of privacy orientated services that are just super convenient and next to nothing in terms of cost. So if you want your privacy, I mean, I'm going to rattle off a few. I'm conscious of the fact that you're perhaps time sensitive, so I'm going to rattle off.
Oh yeah. We are approaching hard stop territory.
Fair enough. I'm going to rattle off a few services now and just say what they are and just ask the viewers to go look them up. So we've already mentioned Proton Mail. We've already mentioned Lineage OS. We've already mentioned Skiff. Nextcloud offers cloud storage services as an alternative to Google Drive. Skiffit.org is an alternative to Google Docs. The Tor project is probably the closest thing that you're going to get to an anonymous internet as it currently is. If you want e-commerce, you and me, we cannot, tell you guys enough to go to the Particle project, PARTICL project, particle.io, and a really good resource if you're starting out is something called the Privacy Cookbook, Privacy Cookbook. So that's on that's a series it's an ongoing series done by a publication called Decentralized Today. I recommend that as actually a decent starting point because, well, not just a starting point, actually just as a reference and resource guide, because they cover so many aspects of improving privacy in your life. And the need to do so in so much detail, things that we do not simply have time to focus on with this show today. So I say those are all really good starting points. I'm going to give AndOTP a shout out because I haven't quite got it working on my phone yet, but I've learned now a lot more about how authenticator services work, having sort of played around with it. And I think that's one of the nice things is when you start taking control of your own privacy, you start learning much better how the infrastructure of various services around you work.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
I will give a shout out to what I think is one of the best channels / sole resources for this information, specifically including degoogling, and that's Mr. Rob Braxman Tech on Odyssey. That gentleman has been doing the Lord's work, in my opinion, of trying to keep people educated. And now I think is the most popular channel on Odyssey, which I find fascinating. But yeah, Rob Braxman Tech specifically covers exactly how to do all these things and has, hundreds of hours of content out there now about how to increase your privacy, use of VPNs, de-Googling, the best phones to get, the best software to get, all that jazz. And so this just a shameless shout out to this guy who I don't know, but I think is doing really good work.
Thank you, because I didn't know about him, and I'm going to go look him up now.
Rob Braxman Tech on Odyssey.
Nice.
It's awesome.
Oh, yeah. So what's the deal with Odyssey, by the way?
So, I don't want to stick my foot in my mouth. I believe Odyssey is a decentralized YouTube alternative built on the library blockchain. And so
that's nice.
I don't know that much about it, but it's great. It's my go-to now. I've kind of de-YouTubed for the most part. I go to YouTube only for content creators for farming and agriculture and things like that just probably are never going to switch to any other platform because it took them a decade to get on YouTube. But for most anything else, I'm already getting a lot of my information from Odyssey.
Yeah. I think that's pretty cool, man. Fine.
And I like the Wild West. I like the kind of just crazy, everything's just weird and wacky, and there's just a bunch of crazy hooligans saying a bunch of stupid shit. I love that. I don't mind that. I can handle that. I grew up in the early days of the internet.
Well, that's the whole point. I feel like the people who tend to be early adopters of these sorts of systems tend to be the most interesting to talk to.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm not worried about being easily influenced by a bunch of charlatans or grifters. I don't really feel that vulnerable, but if anything, the people that would be categorized as whack jobs, wingnuts, conspiracy theorists, charlatans, or grifters, a lot of those people have been proven to be a lot more logical and sane in the past couple of years than some people thought. So, well, I like to drink from a wide soup bowl.
Just like my friend who I hadn't spoken to for like a couple of years, he basically said the exact same thing. He was like, when I was getting into Bitcoin, he's like, "No, it's a scam. Why are you getting your money into that?" And then now he was like, "No, you were right. You really did see everything very far ahead," and it's kind of satisfying. But,
no, I agree. It's really validating, to feel that sometimes.
And it's interesting. We'll probably cover this later on, but where both you and I see the world heading, at least from a tech point of view, that's easy to see. I
feel like it's pretty easy to see.
And that's the interesting thing. The rest of the world, whether it's going to burn, which is what it sometimes feels like it's going to do sometime.
Yep.
I certainly think I just kind of touching on that, I certainly feel like centralized governance structures and, I feel like New Hampshire, where you're living, they've done a lot to improve the state of representative democracy. But I feel like, we need to build systems that make democracy more accessible and make it easier to engage in grassroots. So I agree with you. I think a lot of where we're heading, I think technology will contribute to solving those problems. And I think you and I both have that understanding of where it's heading. So we urge you to check out the Particle Project and set up marketplaces on that. That's my plug.
And I will plug the next episode, which is one I am super passionate about. And the broad topic of, is convenience killing us? Because I think it is. And so we're going to probably talk about that for at least an hour longer than we're supposed to. And since I do have to go pretty much immediately, I will leave everyone with this fun tidbit that I just came across. I don't know if this is a meme or this is even true, but I'm just looking at a picture of a cute rat. A cute rat. And it says, a study showed that sober rats preferred silence, but rats high on cocaine prefer jazz. That's it. I'm out.
Ladies, man.
I'm out. It was great talking.